Welcome to the Army Roster and Battle section of my Warriors of Chaos guide. In this section of the guide, I will cover every single unit's pros and cons, how to best use them in battle, as well as my personal endgame composition. Disclaimer: this guide is based on my personal experiences and opinions and is by no means the definitive way to play the game Immortal Empires. If you have a different strategy or want to add something to mine, please leave a comment down below. Now that's out of the way, let's get into the video. But first, introducing new COLONELDAMNEDERS emote merch. Based on the Discord emotes, these hot new items are guaranteed to improve your frames by at least one. They come in 4 styles from the most popular of these emotes: the Supreme one, the Perfect Emperor, the Vlad Dab, and Dwarven Rage. You can get these designs on t-shirts, mugs, and my personal favourite, die-cut stickers. You can stick these bad boys on pretty much anything you want and add some pizzazz to anything you want. And oh yeah, because I love you all that much, you can use code SIGGY at checkout to get 10% off your entire purchase. That means 10% off your entire cart, meaning the more you buy, the more you save. So heading over to the merch store via the link in the description, or go to teespring.com/stores/COLONELDAMNEDERS and buy yourself something nice. But for real though, buying stuff from the merch store does help to fund the channel in a very direct way, so I appreciate it very, very much, even if you're just going to have a look. One more time before you go, that is code SIGGY at checkout for 10% off your entire basket. Okay, now back to the video. The Chaos roster is again quite basic since the faction hasn't been touched since basically launch. The main draw is the insanely tough front line that you can start building stupidly early. Whenever you unlock a new tier of infantry, they're going to outclass everything unlocked on the same turn by pretty much any other faction. This means you end up rolling through the early game battles with hardly any effort at all, which sets you up nicely for the mid game. One area where the roster does struggle is ranged. You have 0 ranged infantry units and only 1 artillery unit, meaning you basically have nothing on your back line and instead have to rely on ranged cav to take out units from afar, which really don't have the same level of efficacy if you ask me. This also means the faction struggles against a lot of flying units, as they have hardly any way to engage them and end up waiting for them to come down and fight on their own terms. This lack of ranged units also makes the faction very susceptible to being kited, as they must chase units down to get rid of them, and if they can't catch up to or shoot at them, then you're pretty much out of luck. Fortunately, the Chaos Monster roster is insanely strong, and nearly every unit in it can be used effectively if you know how. There are fast and flying units for taking out enemy backlines, and massive units with high damage for obliterating enemy front lines. They pretty much have a monster for nearly any situation. The faction does tend to drop off towards the later game as other factions start to catch up and even surpass them. Factions like the Empire eventually unlock more and more ranged units that tend to take you to pieces before you get near, meaning you need to work twice as hard to take out the same level of front line you so easily dismissed earlier in the campaign. One final thing that stays with the faction until the end is the relatively high leadership most units have. They aren't the dwarves or anything, but the majority of the roster has pretty great leadership, which means by the time they're running, they've given pretty much all they're going to give already. Now, let's get into the roster. Starting us off, we have Chaos Marauders, and for those of you that watched my worst units for every faction video, you'll know that these guys won the award for Chaos, and there's a very specific reason for that, so we'll come to in a little bit. Nevertheless, these guys are really just fine. They're shielded and have some light armor, so have moderate defense against most forms of early game damage. Their damage is nothing to write home about, so even in the early game you'll want to support them with other units to do the real damage, whilst these guys basically just hold the line. If you leave them to fight alone against anything other than other marauders, they will not do well, so giving them help is essential. These guys also come in 2 variations, regular and great weapons. Great weapons are pretty much the same as basic marauders, but with better armor piercing damage and less protection from ranged. You want to replace 4 of your regular marauders with these guys once you can and keep them in the middle of your lines to do the real damage. Unfortunately, they still won't do phenomenal damage, so you still want to support them with other units to get the most work done in your battles. As I said, I'd take 4 of these guys alongside 2 regular marauders to eat any flanks, but you'll soon find out it's hard to recommend taking any of these guys at all. Next up we have Aspiring Champions, and these guys are super weird. I never really found a need for them, and statistically they're actually quite decent. They have comparable stats to Chosen, but for some reason they only have 12 entities per unit. I really don't know what purpose they're supposed to fill, but here's my best guess. Since they are really tough, especially for when you unlock them, they could make an interesting early game front line that could hold the line for a stupid long time, as long as they aren't going against anything armor piercing. They also come with magical attacks, meaning if the enemy brings any units with physical resist, you should be able to take them on with relative ease. Aside from that, I really have got nothing. They're so weird and don't make much sense in any comp aside from the novelty, I'd probably give them a miss. Forsaken are next up, and they're the only monstrous infantry you have access to. They're armoured and do pretty decent damage, along with having the Frenzy ability, meaning while at high leadership, they'll perform even better. Unfortunately though, they have pretty god-awful melee defense, meaning if they go against anything with any AP damage whatsoever, all their efficacy will fall off a cliff and they will melt. And that's the reason I don't use these guys as frontline fighters, the complete lack of survivability and the surplus of better options. I instead use a couple of these guys as support infantry and use their high speed to get around enemy front lines and surround them. Yes, they do still end up taking a lot of damage, but any unit that gets surrounded, especially by high damage units, will crumble in moments, so the loss is worth the gain. It's also really important to make sure you get these guys fighting before they lose any leadership, as those frenzy bonuses can make a real difference if they are fighting the entire time. Overall, these lads are okay, but not amazing, but are certainly worth taking for the point you unlock them. Next we come to Chaos Warriors, which are the meat of the Warriors of Chaos army. They are supremely tough for the stage in the game you unlock them at, with amazing armor stats and a silver shield making them nearly unkillable, especially when you take into account you can recruit them from like turn 4 if you play the game right. These guys are the reason Marauders are so awful. You can literally recruit these guys 4 turns into the campaign and they perform the same role as Marauders but do it infinitely better. They also do decent enough damage, but that really isn't their focus. Other units can do all the killing whilst these guys hold off pretty much anything the enemy can throw at you for a very long time. While they could very likely defeat any hostiles if given enough time, in the interest of saving some of that time and some of the units, you do want to continue to support these guys as much as you can. I absolutely take 6 of these guys to replace all my Marauders in my army because there really is no comparison. The fun doesn't end there though, because these lads come in 3 variations: regular, great weapons, and halberds. Great weapons lose some of that tankiness by abandoning their shields in favour of great axes, which results in excellent armour piercing damage. This allows them to shred through enemy lines, no matter if they're armoured or not, but once you get far enough into the campaign, you will still want to give them help as enemy units catch up to them. Choosing halberds again reduces tankiness from the base Chaos Warriors, but they are now granted armour piercing anti-large damage as well as charge defense against large. This makes them into excellent flank defenders or large target assassins, depending on the circumstance. They are great at protecting your flanks as they can absorb cav charges with ease and fight off most cav units without too much trouble. In my armies, I like to stake 4 great weapons alongside 2 halberds, so I have a good mix of cav protection and high damage frontline fighters. Our final melee infantry units are the Chosen. They are pretty much like Chaos Warriors, but better in every single way, so will perform pretty much the same by the time you unlock them. The first few turns after you've unlocked them, they won't need too much help, but as the campaign goes on, they will be matched by other factions and will need more and more support to continue melting front lines. Again, like most Chaos frontliners, they are more focused on being super tanky than doing a shed load of damage, so never be afraid to support them in order to speed up your battles and minimise casualties. As I said, they are pretty much the same as Chaos Warriors, so I won't waste your time by explaining how to use them again. Like Chaos Warriors, they also have 3 variations: regular, great weapons, and halberds. Great weapons offer higher armor piercing damage, which makes them into more of a damage dealer than regular Chosen. They're incredibly strong in battle and really struggle to find a match, but once the enemy starts bringing ranged units, it becomes more than just a head-on fight to win battles, and they once again need assistance. Taking halberds, again, causes the units to become slightly less tough in exchange for dealing better armor piercing and anti-large damage. This makes them into perfect flank defenders or large target assassins, depending on the circumstance, so you'll have to be the judge once you get on the battlefield. They also do fine on the front lines versus infantry, but it really isn't their best use, so if there is anything large, try and get them in there. As with Chaos Warriors, I choose to take 4 great weapons and 2 halberds with me into the endgame for all my frontline based needs. Moving on to the Cavalry now, we're starting off with the Marauder Horsemen. They're a ranged cav units with excellent speed, vanguard deployment, and the ability to fire whilst moving. All of this makes them into great units for sticking on skirmish mode and sending them around to shoot to the backs of the enemy front lines. They can also be used really well to pick apart enemy cav, as they can outrun most units and fire the entire time, meaning the chasing unit tires and loses health the entire time. The damage isn't phenomenal, but for the early game it's plenty to steadily chip away at the health of most units for the entire battle. Their vanguard deployment does provide them with unique opportunities to deploy from a hidden location before coming out to attack the enemy when they least expect it. This aspect of the unit was one I didn't use too much, but when I did use it, I can't deny the efficacy. Unfortunately, once units run out of ammo, they do end up being pretty useless since they can be beat one-on-one by pretty much anything. What they do really well is chase down retreating units to ensure they don't come back. Just keep an eye on them to ensure the enemy unit doesn't build up the courage to turn on them, since, as I said, they will die to pretty much anything. These guys also come in 2 variations: regular and throwing axes. Taking throwing axes causes them to have less range and ammo but better armor piercing damage. They still have the great speed and ability to fire whilst moving that regular horsemen do, but just need to be slightly closer to do it and will run out of ammo faster. I believe they are a worthwhile upgrade since, according to my very rough maths, they have the highest damage potential of any ranged cav unit in the roster. This means while they may be out of ammo faster, the damage they do with that ammo will make more of a difference in battle. I personally was running between 2 and 6 Marauder Horsemen, which I then replaced with Axes since the increased damage is an easy pick, and some of the only good range damage in the entire roster. The other ranged cav unit the Chaos has access to are Marauder Horsemasters. They are still super fast and have Vanguard deployment, so are experts at getting around the enemy lines. They are pretty much exactly the same as regular horsemen, but are better in every single stat aside from speed. One thing they do not have is armor piercing damage, and to be honest, that's what made it hard for me to justify the upgrade. If you work out the total armor piercing damage potential of both these guys and throwing axes, axes come out on top, so I really don't get why I should upgrade. There's an argument that can be made for them being the most versatile option since they do have the most ammo and best melee stats of all the ranged cav, but when the rest of the army is melee focused, I really don't see the need to lose some range damage in favour of getting even more melee power. If you were to take them, I don't really see the need for more than 2 in an endgame comp. Chaos Knights are the first of the melee cav. They're armoured and shielded, so are incredibly tough to take out no matter how you go about it. They also deal anti-infantry damage, so are best used against infantry if you can help it, but they won't do too awfully versus some other light cav. These guys are more focused on sustained combat rather than cycle charging, since they have mediocre charge bonus and decent melee stats. This means you want to send them in to fight something and leave them there to get the job done. But this does not mean you can just send them into the front lines and forget about them. You want to get deep into the enemy back lines and take out their ranged infantry and artillery before looping back to slam into the backs of their front lines if there's anything left behind. They do still suffer from the classic large unit issue of fighting infantry. They easily get surrounded with each entity taking hits from several entities at once, meaning they rapidly fall apart. You can avoid this issue by embedding them in your side of the front lines, which is a little awkward with cav. Alternatively, you can just keep them on the move whilst fighting infantry to play it safe. These guys also come in 2 variations, regular and lancers. Taking lancers turns a unit into shock cav, which means worse sustained melee in exchange for a devastating charge. This completely changes the way you want to use these guys, as you must constantly keep them on the move or they will fall to pieces. You can still go after the enemy backlines, but instead of taking them on in sustained combat, you want to keep charging in and out of combat to maximise damage by using the charge bonus. Once there are no more ranged units in sight, you can use Hammer and Anvil to continually charge the back of the enemy front line and break them in a matter of moments. I'd say a couple of either of these units would be a great choice for any army, but you must be comfortable with micro to get the most out of lancers. Now we come to the Chariots, starting with the Chaos Chariot. They are armoured and deal anti-infantry damage with a massive charge bonus. They are another unit that requires massive amounts of micromanagement, and I would argue that they are even harder to use than Lance Chaos Knights. They have great charge bonus and awful melee stats, but rather than being able to cycle charge, these lads have to rely on momentum to go straight through enemy units, since the Chariot makes it a little hard to back out of combat. This means they have a high potential for charging damage, but also a high level of timing and skill needed to pull it off, a level that I undoubtedly don't have. Other than that difference though, they can be used to target the same sorts of units. Evaporate the enemy backlines before turning your attention to the back of the front lines. One thing also worth noting is that these guys tend to get completely brutalised by other cav, as they don't have the speed to get away or the damage to fight them in melee, so just keep an eye out and don't let them get picked off. If you want to take them, they work as an alternative to regular cav, so a couple of units is plenty. The other cav unit in the roster is the Gorbius Chariots. They are armoured and deal armour-piercing anti-infantry damage. They are basically the same as Chaos Chariots functionally, but with slightly better stats aside from speed. This means they are used pretty much the same, but you now have to be even more careful as the slower speed makes it even easier for enemy cav to take them out, meaning their micro is astronomical. If you have the Megamind capable of making them work whilst also controlling the rest of your army, then I can honestly say they are great because the potential for damage is huge. They can roll through entire units of enemy infantry and rack up stupid amounts of kills. But for me personally, if I need to focus on them and any other units at the same time, I get a tummy ache, so I don't bother to take them. If you are going to take them, then again, I'd say a couple is plenty. Now we come to the monster units of the Chaos ranks, starting with the Chaos Warhounds. Now these guys are incredibly fast and mildly resistant to missiles due to their scaly skin, which makes them into perfect backline slaughterers. These guys absolutely carried my early game battles on their backs with their supreme ability to take out anything on the enemy backlines with ease. They are incredible, but they do take some nuance to get the most out of them. Since their damage is so low, they normally need to go into a 2-on-1 to take out any full health targets, but if you can manage to set up a nice pincer movement, the enemy unit won't know what's hit them. Since they have that amazing speed, they are also incredible at chasing enemy units down, meaning once you have the enemy on the run, you can keep them running by sending these guys in there and forgetting about them. Needless to say, I loved these guys during my campaign, and was very surprised at this since dogs in all my past experience have been pretty garbage. They also come in 2 variations, regular and poison. Poison Warhounds are literally the exact same unit but now deal poison damage, which we all know is my favourite kind of damage. It means anything these guys go against becomes weaker in pretty much every single way and are even easier to take out. Depending how early in the game it was, I took between 3 and 6 of these guys, and once I could, I replaced my regular lads with poison ones, since there is literally no downside with a great bonus in debuffs. Next up we have the Chaos Feral Manticore, and it's the only flying unit on the roster. Since it can fly and has great speed, it is a monster at getting behind enemies, even if their lines span the entire length of the map. This makes it a great choice for taking out undefended enemy artillery or ranged infantry units, and I am stressing the word undefended because the second this guy gets under some pressure and loses some health, they will rampage and go out of control, which 99% of the time results in them getting way too deep into a fight they have no chance to win. This means they require constant attention to make sure they don't get into trouble, and that if they do, you're ready to throw some support their way. Nevertheless, these guys are a fantastic option for backlines hit squads, and could easily replace your Warhounds if you prefer, but both do the job equally well, and have their respective downsides, so I'll leave the choice up to you. Chaos Trolls are next, and they are pretty similar to Trolls from the Greenskins. They deal good armor piercing damage and have regeneration, but unfortunately also have awful leadership, meaning you really need to pick their engagements to make sure they don't run away. They are one of those units that performs best when embedded in your melee lines, to make sure they can hit as many of the enemy units as they can, whilst the enemy has a struggle to hit them. Sending them in alone will result in them getting swamped, surrounded and slaughtered, so don't do it. Their regen means you can send them in and do some work, and pull them out for a few minutes rest once they start to lose health. This allows you to keep them in the fight for an extremely long time if you can manage to use their entire regeneration cap. The only thing really letting these guys down, aside from the bad leadership, is the fact that they require their own building tree to be recruited, and before they do, they aren't really worth it. They also come in 2 variations, regular and armoured. Armor Trolls are literally exactly the same, but have armor, meaning they perform exactly the same, but will just take less damage whilst doing it. I wouldn't personally pick these guys up because it's not really worth the unique tree, but if you have some coins to toss around, then I'd say no more than 4 in your army to support your melee lines. Now we come to Chaos Spawn, and these guys are the reason Chaos Trolls are obsolete. They may lack the same armor and defense as Chaos Trolls, but they deal so much high damage, meaning the time they do stick around in combat will be way more impactful on the results of the battle, even if they take a couple more hits along the way. On top of this high damage, they are also unbreakable, meaning they will stick around until they die, meaning you can get a shed load of value out of them right till the end, as they will keep swinging and dealing out massive amounts of damage. Other than these differences, I'd say they are pretty much the same and should be used the same way. Embed them in the front lines infantry to protect them from taking too much damage, and they should put in a whole bunch of work and stick around for a very long time. Since they are anti-infantry, it's best to focus them on clumps of enemy infantry, but their high damage by default means they can also be used to focus down nearly anything on the enemy roster, provided it isn't anti-large. In my battles against the Empire, I regularly use several units of my Chaos Spawn to focus down steam tanks, so don't be afraid to send them all over. I took 4 of these guys with me as soon as I could, and they stick with me nearly to the end. Next up is the Chaos Giant. Nope, that's really all there is to say. There is literally no reason I can think of why I'd want to use these guys. Yes, they are huge and can slaughter units of enemy infantry by themselves and terrify anything they come into contact with, but they just suck. Giants in general are awful in the game for a couple of reasons. They are massive range targets, so peasant archers can melt them if they decide to focus fire, and with a target like that, I'm not really sure why they wouldn't. Giants are also quite slow, so are really easy to outmaneuver, which means they often end up walking in circles trying to catch their target. On top of all this, the Chaos Giant requires its own entire building tree to unlock them, and the damn thing costs like 10,000 gold. Yes, they can do some decent damage versus most units that aren't anti-large, but so can like 5 other units in the roster that won't get shot to death whilst doing it. I honestly cannot recommend them, but if you're going to insist, then I'd say replace your Chaos Spawn and thrust them into the middle of the enemy clumps to tear them up, and for God's sake, take out as many of the enemy ranged units as you can. Dragon Ogres are next up, and these guys are real good. They deal armor piercing damage with a bonus versus large, and have pretty good speed and scalar skin, which provides them with missile protection. All of this adds up to a very versatile unit that can be your entire army if you enjoy cheese. They can work in the same way as Chaos Spawn, embedding themselves in your melee lines and tearing up the enemy infantry from there. They can move around into the enemy backlines and take out any ranged units, even if they are protected, as well as charging into infantry backs to shatter them with ease. They can even chase some enemy cav down and render them useless for the entire battle if they fancy. There isn't really a bad way to use them, since they are just all around great. I love these guys and took 4 of them for a while to replace my Chaos Spawn before dropping them down to 2 to replace my Cav, since these guys have nearly the same speed and much more killing power. Honestly, take as many of these guys as you want, as they will not let you down. Our final monster unit is the Dragon Ogre Shagoth, and this lad is the daddy of the Dragon Ogres. He is armoured and deals huge amounts of armor piercing damage with a bonus versus large. He causes terror to anything that crosses his path, and has added toughness from range due to his scalar skin. As I said, he's basically a single unit Dragon Ogre that got way bigger and way scarier. Alternatively, he's Kolik's little brother, but all you need to know is, these guys are scary good. They have phenomenal stats across the board, and, like regular Dragon Ogres, can be used in a multitude of ways to great effect. They could be used as a cav alternative, but I chose to use regular Dragon Ogres for this due to the multiple entities. That doesn't mean that Chariots wouldn't be good at it, just that I preferred them elsewhere. I personally chose to use these guys to replace my Chaos Spawn in assisting my melee lines by embedding them in my front lines and watching the enemy units evaporate. If this wasn't necessary, then I used them to hunt down enemy cav since they do excel versus large and have excellent speed, making them into large unit assassins. They can also run around the enemy front lines and charge into their backs if you really fancy bullying the front line, but as I keep saying, there really is no bad way to use these lads since they are so damn good in just about every way. The only bad way to use them is to not use them at all, so I pick up at least 4 of them and put them to work. Finally, we come to the one and only artillery unit, the Hell Cannon. It fires armor-piercing missiles which do dummy amounts of damage in a massive explosion area. These shots are doomfire, which means they reduce the leadership of whatever they hit, and also have some light tracking, meaning they can be great for hitting slow-moving targets that would normally avoid most missiles. Finally, they are unbreakable, so will only stop fighting when they fall in battle. Now of course, when you're using these guys, you want to keep them on the back lines and pick out any high value targets you can see and soften them up before they meet your lines. The explosive projectiles make them great at taking out multiple entities like infantry, so if the enemy has several high tier units next to each other, just aim there and watch the value roll in. The seeking projectiles make them decent at targeting cav, but it isn't perfect, so only send them after things they can actually hit, otherwise they're just wasting ammo. Though, to be honest, there isn't really a bad target for them to aim at, aside from tiny single entities. They also have a massive range, so can hit basically anything on the battlefield, meaning you rarely need to move them up. Missiles also do magical damage, so if the enemy brings any physical resist, this guy is going to ignore it. The unbreakable leadership means that if they do happen to get flanked, you have plenty of time to get some units over to save them before they die, and they will always hop straight back on the guns once they can. The only real downside of this unit is the single entity, which means it only fires a single shot every few seconds, which limits its damage per second somewhat. To compensate for this, I bring 2 to 4 if I'm feeling particularly spicy, and at that point there isn't a single army in the game that isn't a little bit scared. Now we come to the Regiments of Renown. I'll call out each unit, what it's a unit of, and the differences between them and the base units of the same rank. The Mirror Guard are a unit of Chaos Warriors and gain 10 speed, 2 weapon strength, and immunity to psychology. The Demon Spew are a Forsaken unit and gain poison attacks and the Swarm Flies effect. The Swords of Chaos are a Chaos Knights unit and lose 36 entities but gain 10 leadership, 10 melee attack, and 11 melee defense. The Weird Spawn are a Chaos Spawn unit and gain 15% physical resistance. They also lost 10 leadership but are still unbreakable, so it makes 0 difference. The Summoners of Rage are a Dragon Ogres unit and gain magical attacks and the Chain Lightning bound spell. Finally, the Soul of Damnation is a Hell Cannon and gains 15 ammo, 29 missile strength, and the Soul Devourer effect. Now we come to my ideal balanced composition for the endgame. Remember, this might not be the best comp possible, but it's what I would run in my endgame Chaos campaigns. I like to lead my armies with Fighting Lords accompanied by a Firecaster. For my front line, I like to take 2 chosen with halberds and 4 with great weapons, and I keep the halberds on the flanks to absorb any cav charges. I take 2 Marauder Throw and Axe Horsemen because they're some of the only ranged units the faction has, and coming without any is a bad idea. I take 2 Dragon Ogre units to use as pseudo cav. I take 4 Dragon Ogre Shagoffs to support my front lines. Finally, I take 4 Hell Cannons because they're fun and they also mop the floor with anything they fire at. To see how this performs in battle, I'll pass you over to live commentary, Miles. Take it away.
Thanks for that, Miles. Here we are in the example battle versus the Empire. This is my ideal composition, and the Empire is just some random stuff. They have a bunch of artillery, a bunch of cav, a buttload of frontline greatswords, and a load of gunners and archers and all sorts of exciting things, being led by a general of the Empire and a battle priest, a warrior priest, apologies. Right, let's get this underway. I start to move my Firecaster and my Lord out to the front. My Lord's pretty much just there, just to scout out any breath ability opportunities. The Firecaster is looking to get a cast in, because, of course he is. Over on the left here, I'm sending over, the Marauder Horsemen and the Dragon Ogres. They're going to try and engage these 2 units of Demigryph Knights, and the same thing on this side over here. I'll possibly try and get around into those artillery, and we'll just see what they manage to do. Now, in the middle here, the enemy has completely clumped up, so I just did do a breath ability, and also the Fire Vortex spell is going down in that fat clump, as well as a bunch of artillery shots. I'm trying to target my artillery all over the map here, get some of these cav, get some in the middle, and get some of everything pretty much. For some reason, the Marauder Horsemen throwing axes decided to go into melee combat. I'm not exactly sure why they did that. They had skirmish mode on, they just choose to ignore me, so that's a little bit frustrating, but nevertheless, it's not the end of the world. Now, I move my Lord and my Spellcaster, since they are on flying mounts, into the backline to take care of the Hellstorm Rocket Batteries, because we all know how much trouble the Hellstorm Rocket Batteries can cause, so I want to shut those down as soon as I possibly can. Over on the right here, the Dragon Ogres have engaged with 2 units of Greatswords and a unit of Demigryph Knights. Not too much of a worry. I mean, they're fairly outnumbered. There's some high-tier units, but they are being supported by the Thrown Axes, and I'll be able to pull some artillery around to them as well. Over on the right here, the Demogryph Knights with halberds have decided to fight my Dragon Ogre Shaggoth and my Chosen Halberds. Not the best idea, but we'll just see how that one works out. I don't think it's going to be good for them. The General of the Empire, for some reason, decided to go deep into my lines and fight a Dragon Ogre Shaggoth and my Chosen with great weapons, so he is definitely not going to be sticking around for a very long time whatsoever. My Dragon Ogres on the left flank, they managed to take out one unit of Demogryph Knights and now moving into the second ones that took out my Marauder Horsemen throwing axes. On the back lines, a lot of the enemies are broken, just basically from artillery fire and a few spells. As you can see, the 2 units of Hellstorm rocket batteries have been taken out, so now my Lord and my Spellcaster are moving in to see what other opportunities they can find. We have a cast of the Burning Head going down these handgunners here, and we'll just see how that goes, especially with a few artillery shots coming in as well. I get the feeling that, yep, that unit completely melted. I was trying to hit Gundam and some Surefires as well, but they kind of move into an awkward position, so I don't really get too many hits on them. But nevertheless, a decent cast, and 285 kills on your Firecaster with 2 spells. That ain't half bad at all. Now, over on the right here, I see that my Dragon Ogre Shaggoths, my Dragon Ogres, sorry, they still need a little bit of assistance. They're doing not too bad, but they are getting shot by the Luminax of High, so I move in my Lord and my Spellcaster to take these guys out. Just dive on them, prevent them from firing. Even if they don't kill them, they're keeping them busy. In the middle here, pretty much everything has broken, which is kind of mopping up for the remainder of the battle here. 2 units of Demogryph Knights charging into, well, 3 units. 2 of them being infantry and 2 of them being anti-large, so yeah, that's not going to go too well for them. Then my Lord has just died, and we can see here that pretty much everything is wavering, damage sustained, and army losses. And there we go, a nice, easy victory versus a Empire army of the exact same cost of this army. Yes, it wasn't my ideal balanced Empire army, but it was a random one that AI decided to pull together, and I think it performed pretty well. It was a very decisive, close victory. Let's just have a look at the stats where I call it a close victory. So what did I lose? I lost 1 entire unit of Marauder Horsemen throwing axes due to, I don't know, them not really listening to me. And that's pretty much it. I lost 187 units, and probably about 60 of them were these guys. So that is a very, very, very decent losses there. I would call that a fantastic win. A very small army I'm tending to bring, apparently. 686 units is not a lot. Pretty much to do with all my large units in the artillery being basically 4 units each, so not really bringing too much there. But let's have a look how each unit performed. The Chaos Lord, pretty good, 82 kills, basically from those 2 buff abilities. Fantastic once they got on those Dragon Mounts, absolutely fantastic. Take those as soon as you can. The Chaos Sorcerer Fire, the best caster for most factions, let's be honest. 285 kills with 2 casts in massive clumps. I don't know why the enemy clumped up so much for me, but I'm so grateful they did. It was absolutely wonderful. On the front lines here, as you can see, not too many kills, 54, not too bad for Chosen great weapons, but as I always say, Chaos frontline are basically there to hold the line while everything else does the damage for them. And the Dragon Ogre Shaggoths, also not getting too many kills, but I think most of the enemy lines evaporated before they got there. But they lost basically no health and did some excellent work and cleaned up a bunch of kills. The regular Dragon Ogres, 60 and 20 kills each. Those guys that got 6 kills were fine on the right flank versus 2 units of Greatsword, so they picked up a lot more kills than the guys that were fighting against the Demogryph Knights, just purely because of the entity size that they were fighting against. 35 kills in the thrown axes, not too bad, and a lot of damage going out over a wide area. So even if they didn't get, hundreds of kills, they're doing a lot of damage and contributing to the victory quite substantially. And finally, my favourite, the Hell Cannon Artillery. 65 kills, 50, 26, and 17. Not too bad, especially when everything pretty much died in that single Firecast at the start there. So they're pretty much just mopping up. But yes, I'm very, very pleased with this army, and I hope you enjoy it. And yes, back to Miles. Thanks for that, Miles. That concludes this section of the guide on the Chaos Armies. Next time we'll cover the Lords and Heroes, and what they can do for you both in the campaign and on the battlefield. Thanks for watching this section of my Warriors of Chaos guide. If you want to check out the other parts, there's a link in the description to a playlist for the series. Don't forget to vote on the poll for the next race you want me to make a guide for, which is linked in the description. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then please do consider leaving it a like, as it really does help out a lot. And if you want to see more of this type of video, maybe click that subscribe button so you stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.